Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again. It's already been such a great time together today, just worshiping. Thanks, Stephen, for leading us so beautifully. It's a pretty tender day, isn't it? We've got Audrey and Ariel here with Matilda. Welcome, you guys. Shh, baby's sleeping. Baby's sleeping. Oh, she's okay. Okay. And it's very tender. Saeed's parents are here with us today. Welcome from Iran. So obviously we're praying for Iran, praying for God's mercy and intervention. And today, Joanna, in a few hours, is going in for a pretty major surgery. And so we're going to be praying for her. Kathleen and I had a beautiful time in prayer with them as a family this morning. So we want to pray for them. And Jose's here. Jose is getting ready to go to Toronto for 2 weeks to visit his mom. He'll be back for a couple more weeks, and then he's off to the Philippines for a couple months. And he brought his wagon because our pantry is so full downstairs that we told you not to bring any food today. And so he's going to be distributing some food to our neighbors, people who are on the margins, who have food insecurity. He's got a friend over at the Longhouse. They're collaborating. So empty those shelves, buddy. Yeah, before you go. Amen. Well, today we're continuing a series on the Sermon on the Mount. We're calling it A New Exodus, with Jesus being presented by Matthew as a new Moses. And today's topic, as we just read in our text, is tending to your anger in an age of rage. We are living in an angry time. Did anybody notice that? Did you know that the Gallup poll does an annual global emotions report? I didn't know that. And they are saying that we are at the highest levels of perpetual anger in the past few years than we've been at since recent memory. Every year they ask this question: did you experience anger during a lot of every day of the year? And it's even higher now, but in 2021, it was 23% of the people that responded, and it was up from 18% in 2014. And they say that it's still growing. And we have all kinds of rage today. Road rage, we're familiar with. Bike rage, right, Dan? Pedestrian rage, shopper's rage, if you talk too long to the cashier, the people behind you get mad. Swimming lane rage. Soccer dad or mom rage. Work rage, domestic rage. There's rage everywhere. Anger isn't new. We've always been angry as a human race, ever since Cain. But there are two things I think that are unique to our time. Number one is that due to the onset of social media and online platforms and influencers, we are now more aware of people's anger. It's like the filters are off. Have you noticed that? Secondly, following on from that, anger is contagious. How many have noticed that? Somebody honks at you from behind, they spread their anger. I mean, it's so common in my neighborhood. I'll hear somebody honk at somebody, and sure enough, within a minute or within a second, it's back. Anger is contagious. And you add to this the culture wars, the deep divisions in our society. It's a guy named Joseph Cohen who writes for the Guardian newspaper who said this: you are often left with the societal divisions with the feeling that you have to defend your very identity. And there's been a significant spike in societal anxiety and insecurity. When insecurity and nervousness become a society's dominant mood, anger spreads as a defense mechanism against fear and perceived threats. And it counters the feeling of powerlessness into a destructive collective anger. Instead of disagreement and differences with each other that breed curiosity and mutual civil exchange and civil discourse, we default to antagonism and mutual cancellation from inside our own echo chambers. And today, populist leaders, they've always done this, but with social media, populist leaders take advantage of that anger, of that social angst, and they know how to exploit it to their own ends. Anger, for them, is the political gift that keeps on giving, and they stoke a rage for which there can be no relief. Wow, what a quote. In the midst of an age of rage, Jesus says this. Do not be angry. Okay, heads bowed, let's go home. So, he says these words in our text, as Gorgeous read. You have heard that it was said to people long ago, you shall not murder. And anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who's angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Ronald Rolheiser, just listen to, I've been telling you some about his podcast this week, interviewed by John Mark Comer, says this: do not die a bitter and angry person. That is the only moral imperative there is. Wow, what a statement. Whew. And it's that call for drastic action that Jesus is calling for. Remember I said a couple weeks ago that Jesus he teaches using shock therapy, hyperbole, exaggeration to make a point because we're so stuck in a certain way of thinking. And again, context is everything when we listen to Jesus' teaching. Remember our story. Israel had been called to be a light to the nations, but that light had become hidden in Jesus' time. They had become discordant, a fractioned society, Jews against Romans, Samaritans attacking Jews, and then Jews retaliating against the Samaritans. Samaritans would be like the modern-day Palestinians. Jewish parties fighting and attacking each other. And the fault lines of the society ran right through villages, families, dinner tables, households. Does that sound familiar? Now remember, during Jesus' time, Israel was an occupied country, and they were always on edge. And so as a new Moses, Jesus was inviting them to a new exodus. And like Moses, he ascended to a mountain and came back. Like Moses ascended and came back with the 10 Commandments, Jesus comes back with his Sermon on the Mount, declaring that he had not come to abolish the law and the prophets, that the project of Israel being a light to the nations was still in effect. However, he was reconstituting a new Israel with Jews and Gentiles, slave and free, male and female, with a new constitution. But it was going to take hyperbole and shock value for his hearers to understand that he was presenting an upside-down kingdom. Remember when he said, if your eye offends you, pull it out? If your hand offends you, cut it off? Did he mean that literally? Of course not. But he uses drastic language to get our attention. The writer of Ephesians, Paul, said, when you're angry, don't let it carry you into sin. He was actually quoting Psalm 3 or 4. Don't let the sun set with your anger in your heart, or give the devil room to work. So anger is not sin in itself, but it puts you in a danger zone. Don't let it lead you into sin where the devil can wreak havoc. He goes on to say, banish bitterness, rage, anger, shouting, slander. I'll lower my voice. And any and all malicious thoughts. These are poison. Remember the bitterness illustration? When you take poison in your mouth, liking bitterness to poison, and what do? You kind of slush it around in your mouth. when you know it's poison, you spit it out, right? What time did I start, Randy? I lost track. I'm sorry. I know it was after the hour. I'm asking him because I lose track of my time, and it helps me to know. You don't remember? Okay. Graciously forgive one another for preaching long, just as God has forgiven you. Just kidding. So take the hard road, Jesus says. Remember, we talked about this, that the Sermon on the Mount is not easy. It's hard. But it's the way to life. Avoid two ditches. The first ditch is destructive anger, which he talks about in this text. But also avoid repressed anger. Repressed anger is just as dangerous because it stays in your body and it comes out sideways and things go south. Gabor Mate, in his wonderful book, The Myth of Normal, talks about how that so much cancer and ALS and other diseases are directly related to repressed anger. And caveat, not every cancer is, not every ALS is, but it often contributes to it. It's in your body. And so we have to tend to our anger. So recognize, first of all, that there's 3 phases towards destructive anger. The first is you feel angry, and that's a normal response. It's not wrong. Just like a headache isn't wrong. It's not fun, but it's not wrong. A feeling, a legitimate pain of suffering, a slight, someone hurts you or crosses you, or they hurt someone you love, and they cross them, and you care about that. That's secondary anger. And this is often harder, isn't it? Secondary anger. It's not wrong in itself, yet Jesus warns that there is a danger when this is present. If not tended to, it will progress destructively. Here it's important to be aware of a tiny walnut-shaped part of your brain called the amygdala. Did I pronounce that right, Rachel? That when it senses danger, it releases hormones that put you in the 3F mode. Now, 3F, the F word, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. These hormones increase your blood rate, or your blood pressure, your heart rate, tension in your muscles, and they can cause a reaction in you before your rational prefrontal cortex, which is more rational, can provide some context. And this is, of course, what happens in road rage, right? You go ballistic. We use that term. He went ballistic. Well, what happened? The amygdala took over, right? And other incidences that people later regret, right? So that's the first step. You got to tend to it right at that point. The second is malice. So when that anger evolves to a malicious intent, you want to harm the person who's been hurtful. And then thirdly, a nursed anger, where you're salving a wounded ego. It provides a temporary relief. Why would you nurse your anger? Well, it provides relief. It actually soothes that sense of wounded ego that you have. When we've been wounded, our pride has been hurt. Or we've been demeaned and diminished. There's an adrenaline rush of anger that compensates for the sense of worthlessness that we feel. There's this delicious morsel of self-righteousness, Dallas Willard says, that retains the anger, and we feel justified to the point that it can become all-consuming. So in light of this, Jesus offers some case studies. These are not laws, but these are case studies in tending to our anger. First case study is the language of contempt. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, raka. Now, the pronunciation in the Greek, I think that's actually Aramaic, is raka. What do you do just before you spit? That's exactly what that word means. It's contempt, right? And you say raka is answerable to the court, and anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. Of course, as good evangelicals, we think of that place, the hot place after you die, and it has nothing to do with that. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with your life now, right? Raka is a label of contempt. The word sounds as I said, this kind of clearing of your throat before you spit. It means you're good for nothing, worthless one, empty. Today we might say idiot or stupid or numbskull. When you label someone like that, what are you doing? You are dehumanizing them. When you dehumanize somebody with a label, you dehumanize yourself, and then you can justify almost any action of harm against them. Jesus upholds and affirms the imago Dei in all people. Imago Dei means image of God. Every person, atheist or Christian, gay or straight, Muslim or Jew or agnostic, is in the image of God. And he condemns all contemptuous language, whether you agree with someone or not, regardless of how they behave. He goes on to say that to call someone a fool is to be in danger of the fires of hell. What does that mean? Well, the word in the Greek is Gehenna, which was a valley outside Jerusalem, which was literally the garbage dump where they would throw carcasses of animals, they would throw crucified criminals who did not have a normal burial, and garbage, and there was a perpetual fire burning because it was unclean for Jews to have this dead flesh, and so the fire was always burning. So he's referring to that. It was a consuming, perpetual burning to consume the refuse. And the word fool comes from the Greek word moros. Sound familiar? Where we get the word moron, blockhead, dumb. Not just brainless, but in a stupid and moral sense. Kind of like an a-hole. Kind of like, yeah. I mean, think of some of the words that we use today to label people, to write them off, that we yell at each other in traffic. What's that warning of hell? Well, N.T. Wright says this, that every time you choose to let your anger smolder in you like that garbage dump, like that Gehenna, you're becoming a little less than fully human. You are deciding to belittle yourself and become abusive and foul. And the fire literally consumes you as the smoldering garbage dump of ancient Jerusalem, and it can take you over completely. Do you remember that? I don't know if it was Valkyrie, but it's the Valkyrie story where they had this assassination plot on Hitler, and this guy got in the same room as Adolf Hitler and had the opportunity to shoot him, and he couldn't do it. And later he said it was because he knew. He saw the imago Dei in the person he was about to shoot, and he was afraid of what would happen to him if he did that. So Paul writes, this is how you once behaved, characterized by your evil deeds, but now it's time to eliminate them from your lives once and for all. Anger, fits of rage, all forms of hatred, cursing, and filthy speech. Case study number 2. Reconciliation equals worship. Now Jesus uses some more hyperbole here. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them, and then come and offer your gift. This is really funny, because somebody's traveled all the way from Galilee. It's a 3-day journey, and they get to with their animal sacrifice in Jerusalem, and they offer their gift on the altar, and there's the animals wiggling, and all of a sudden they remember that somebody's angry at them. Notice the order there. They're not angry. Somebody's angry at them, right? He says, leave that poor animal there at the altar and head back to Galilee. All right? Now, it's a bit hyperbolic, all right? It's a bit of an exaggeration, but his point is that reconciliation is on the same level of worship. It's like the prophet Amos. Away with your songs of worship. Let justice roll, right? So the point is, reconciliation with each other takes precedence. Remember Francis, 2017? We canceled church to be part of the Reconciliation March. It was one of the most beautiful worship times we ever had. Joined tens of thousands of people. Martin Luther King's daughter preached. Woo, that was amazing. Reconciliation. Note that the order. So in one case, Jesus says, if your brother or sister is angry at you, you go to them. However, if you're angry at them, in Matthew 18, you go to them. The onus is on you. It's hard. It's hard being a follower of Jesus. But in both cases, you do the going. You take the initiative. Isn't it hard always being the first person to say, I'm sorry? Case number 3, de-escalate. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you're still together on the way, or your adversary may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown in prison. Truly, I tell you, you won't get out till you've paid the last penny. Now, this probably did happen at times. It was a very litigious culture like ours. However, it was also a metaphor for our relationships, learning to de-escalate when you can. How many have found trying to have the last word is always so costly? Right? The determined to have the last say can put you in jail, relationally, spiritually, emotionally. Followers of Jesus know the art of de-escalation. In my pastoral counseling, spiritual direction, and interaction, I pastor people who call me from around the country. You know, it seems like when people move away, they still think you're their pastor. And but I'll tell you, there's been a number of horrific situations where there was a domestic fight. And I'll tell you, the result was jail. The result was irreparable damage, at least in this life. So the alternative is to make friends while you can. Climb off your high horse, your pedestal, leave your seat of judgment, and stand on the same level ground as that person. Doesn't mean we never go to court. Sometimes we do. That's not the point. The point is work on reconciliation and making friends to do all that you can. So the whole point of this, Jesus is saying, is the imago Dei and the preciousness of every human person. That's the point of this text, is to love well. The 10 Commandments are inadequate. They were a society where as long as they didn't murder somebody, they were okay. As long as they didn't commit adultery, they were okay. But they had missed the point of the command to love your neighbor. My neighbor, Karen Reed, who lives a block away on Parker House, wonderful woman, she's spoken here in our church. She posted this quote the other day, on Friday, by a podcaster, Elizabeth Oldfield, who was reflecting on managing to disagree without even resisting and dehumanizing others. How do we disagree with each other in this fractious society without dehumanizing others? In group/out-group thinking is ultimately dissatisfying. Understanding our preference for people like ourselves, we are people who can go beyond our tribes. Changing other people is not within our power. What helps is admitting our bone-deep desire to be right and to belong. So she says this, the work of weaning ourselves off the sugar high of wrath. I like that. Sugar high of wrath. The comforting salve of tribal contempt is hard. Self-righteous rage and dehumanization, when my amygdala is up in arms, seems actively moral. I've been doing this work for almost a decade, and I still have to remind myself that contempt actively makes things worse, hardening people into their pre-existing positions and driving us further apart. So how do we take the hard road towards tending to our anger so that it's constructive? The first is the 5-second rule. I call it amygdala management. Forgive me, Rachel, I'm trying to say that word. Okay, thanks. Amygdala management, right? And simple thing, count 5 seconds when someone honks at you. Count 5 seconds when someone cuts you off. Count 5 seconds when someone posts something stupid on Facebook. Count 5 seconds.
1001.
Yeah, 1001 helps. Or take a few breaths. And Jose, he hopped in my car and I drove him to the pub on Friday night. And on the way, he told me that he realized in the middle of one of his days that he was really feeling angry. And then he realized he was hangry. Sometimes it's just paying attention to your body, right? Your blood sugar. Those things matter, right? They can make you more on edge. So I want to quote a Muslim. This is Muhammad's son-in-law. A moment of patience in a moment of anger saves 1,000 moments of regret. Isn't that a good quote? A moment of patience in a moment of anger saves 1,000 moments of regret. Thank you, Muhammad's son-in-law. So tending to grief and pain, this is important. Because behind anger is always hurt, right? Always some kind of pain or hurt. And we need lament. Lament is expressing our anger and our pain. All anger has underlying hurt and powerlessness to do anything. We feel like we've lost our agency about the hurt, and this has to be attended to. Lament, remember the Psalms, almost 50% of the Psalms are lament, right? They're expressing anger and hurt to God. And there's a whole book in the Bible called Crying, I call it. Lamentations. And this can include raging at God. Henry Nouwen wrote an article, Can I Hate God? Catholic priest. And he said this, it is clear that only by expressing our anger and hatred directly to God will we come to know the fullness of both His love and our freedom. But if we deny and suppress our anger, it actually interferes with our intimacy with God. Have you ever noticed that? You just have it out with God and you let Him know and you go, oh, I feel close to God. English Dominican Gerald Van said this in his book, Divine Pity. He writes, God doesn't hate anything God created. I'm going to say that again. God doesn't hate anything that God created. But God pities it in the true meaning of the word pity, which is to have compassion for the suffering of everything. I found this quote in a book called The Tears of Things that Kathleen and I are reading together now for the second time by Richard Rohr. And Rohr argues that the prophets, you know those angry guys in the Old Testament, and some ladies too, those angry people, they actually began in rage, in a good, justified rage for what they were seeing, and they even project that rage onto God. But then they come in contact with God's compassion as they're honest and real and raw. They come in contact with God's compassion. And so what happens is that rage turns to tears. And so God weeps in pity over us because judgment is actually what we've done to ourselves. Jesus said, I didn't come to destroy. I came to save the world. Thirdly, contemplative practices like mindfulness, silence, solitude. These are sermons in themselves, but Sabbath. And because our devices are so fuel so much anger, control your devices. They can be helpful, they can be useful tools, but often they're the source of triggering the amygdala. They are. So set some rules for yourself, like no device an hour before bed, no device an hour after I get up. I take a Sabbath day where I'm just off the social media, off the media. Have time, block it off. The world's too beautiful. The world's too wonderful. Even though there's so much crap going on, there's a lot of good, a lot of good. Spiritual direction. I'm going to do confession and community. You and I can suffer anything if we're not alone. If we have people who are suffering with us, we can get through it. So James said this, confess your faults one to another and pray for one another that you may be healed. We can bear anything if we're not alone. And then a shameless promotion, spiritual direction. Spiritual direction is where, either through a group that's attentive to you or a person, one-on-one, they help you discern in your own heart where God is at work in your suffering, in your pain, or your joy. And this sounds really profound. Therapy. A lot of us carry trauma and pain in our bodies, and we need professional help. And we don't need to be ashamed of that. I found that Walter Brueggemann, one of the greatest Old Testament scholars of our time, recently passed away. But just before he did, Sojourners asked him this question in an interview. But it feels so unsettling to have so many self-proclaimed Christians who seem to have no problem voting for a man who seems to epitomize the opposite of that love your neighbor ethic. So obviously they're asking him about the American president and why so many Christians, sorry, I shouldn't do that, voted for him. And this is his answer. He replied, "The support for Trump is complex, but I think at bottom it is resentment. He is a master at mobilizing resentment. It's resentment towards liberals, towards moneyed people, towards the so-called governing class. We have to give thought to how we respond to people who are set deep in resentment." Now, as followers of Jesus, I want to read that again. We have to give thought to how we respond to people who are set deep in resentment. Our work in that regard has to do with generosity, with paying attention, with hearing the narrative of resentment. Get that? Listening. And outflanking that narrative with generosity.